You're listening to Creating a Universe, a Love Anarchy podcast hosted by William J. Rogers. On this show, we follow the journey of creatives, artists, and entrepreneurs who are making a name for themselves in the ever-evolving landscape of today's industry. Featuring an insight into both Love Anarchy and the Lovaniverse music universe, as well as the individual projects and stories of each of our guests, from the music industry and beyond. So whether you're a budding creative or simply interested in what goes on behind the scenes, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Creating a Universe. I'm your host, William J. Rogers, and today I'm here with guitarist and vocalist of the cinematic metal band Disconnected Souls, Holly Francis Royle. How's it going, Holly?
Hi, I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Oh, absolute pleasure. It's so great to get a chance to chat with you. Just been saying, been following your work for a good while, so it's an exciting time with the album coming out. So yeah, great to have you here. For anybody who might not be familiar with yourself and what you do, would you be able to perhaps start with a bit of an overview as to what you're up to?
Sure, I'm one of those slightly annoying people who has fingers in several different pies at the same time. But as you mentioned, yeah, I do guitars and vocals and all sorts of programming and orchestral and random composition stuff for Disconnected Souls. And yeah, we have our debut album out Friday 19th of January, which is in a couple of days' time as of recording this. So it's all panic mode, but good panic mode. But yeah, I work in music PR. I do stuff with metal bands. I do bits of journalism here and there, and I'm doing a PhD in heavy metal because why not? So that's basically in a nutshell everything that I do.
Amazing. It's quite a lot of things, isn't it? I did have to try and work out, like, what do I actually put in the intro? Obviously, I said guitarist and vocalist, but I thought
I realized
so much.
So that's all good. That's all good.
Yeah, no, awesome. I appreciate you elaborating. So there's obviously lots for us to get stuck into there. Really looking forward to it. But I suppose the best, a good a place to start as any is the band Disconnected Souls, and the album that. So as you say, we're recording just before it comes out, but the album will be out by the time people are listening to this. It's such an awesome record. I'm really happy to have already got a chance to hear it.
Thank you so much.
And obviously you guys, you've included a lot of songs that you've been kind of drip feeding for a while. So I think perhaps again, if we're thinking of people that might not be aware or heard you guys before, would you perhaps be able to give maybe a bit of an overview as to the band itself and your sound?
Yeah, sure. So we've started describing ourselves as cinematic metal because, quite frankly, there isn't really a genre label that fits, and that's kind of the closest we can get. Nice. It's basically we sort of love all musical genres and all subgenres of metal, so we combine as many of those as possible into one. So we're a little bit progressive in the respect of our song structures are quite experimental, and we're maybe doing merging of styles that isn't quite, maybe not what you'd think of doing, but we have stuff that is more metalcore leaning. Some of it's almost symphonic metal, some of it's prog, some of it's just metal with electronics and all that good stuff. So there's kind of a little bit for everyone, and we intentionally write every song to be different. So there will be some people really like some of our songs and maybe aren't so keen on others, and that's absolutely fine. And that's, in some ways, that makes it a little bit more interesting because it means people can sort of dive through our catalogue and find what they like and things like that. So yeah, I realize that's not maybe the best description of a musical project. But yeah, lots of electronics, lots of orchestral cinematic stuff, and then lots of good metal stuff. And I do clean vocals. We have Patrick who does harsh vocals and clean. Felix also does some clean vocals. So we have lots of like multi-textural vocal stuff, but also multi-textural instruments and things all going on at the same time as well.
Yeah, no, I love it. I get it. I think that it's a good description of what you guys are about. But I know how it goes when it's like you just have such a mixing pot of things that you're like, oh, and you try and describe it to people and they're like, oh, well, I'm not sure it's like that. And then so you all gets convoluted. I think that if it helps sort of whatever 2 cents it's worth, I felt like, yeah, you guys have different things going on from track to track, but I think it all really ties together very nicely. And if I was to try and kind of bridge it into something, I would kind of think it's kind of like a bit of like an industrial Gothic
Oh, yes.
modern metal kind of
Mm.
thing, because I think that you've got this really cool modern metal sound going where it's kind of progressive metalcore, genty kind of stuff. But there's a lot of these, as you say, cinematic, but quite dark, atmospheric, Gothic, and industrial stuff. Lots of electronic kind
Mm.
of elements going on too. So I feel like those are the really cool components overall, and it's a really cool sound. Like, a unique
Oh, that's
mixing
great.
pot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
your guys. I mean, I suppose that comes from you guys all clearly kind of contribute quite a lot. Like in the credits, it's like all of you have like four things that you're
I
doing
know.
or something. So
Yeah, we sort of move away from the, I guess, almost more traditional sort of standard of maybe just one or even two members writing everything and then everyone else plays. We're very much everyone all hands on deck if they want to be um
mm,
type arrangement. So we have some songs which all of us will very much be collaborating on at the same time, but then we'll go off and individually write songs and then bring back demos and then everyone jumps in on the demo for like the final little bits
mm,
of sparkle kind of thing. And that also makes it a little bit more cohesive if everybody has a little bit of input, even if it's on someone else's song.
mm.
Um, but I realize that's probably quite unusual for for a band.
But I think it's very cool. I think it's unusual because it's difficult to do,
Mm.
to have such a collaborative arrangement within a group. So you have to have quite a lot of trust and kind of vulnerability and a lot of chemistry between you guys to do that. So you guys have been working as a unit for a while, right? And
Yeah, and we've all been a big friendship group for a long time. Quite
mm,
a few of the members all went to the same school and stuff, so like known each other for years, and I think that helps.
mhm,
That there's so many similarities, but also everybody has their own little individual personalities as well. So I
mm,
mean, I think you can kind of not always, but I think you can generally tell whose song is whose. I mean,
mhm.
mine tends to be like the dark gothic-y ones.
Yeah, yeah,
So on the album Human Error and Petrichor were very much mine, and then yeah, brought them to the others and added on like the last little bits.
mhm,
Loveless is Patrick's, Silence of the Doves is Felix. So you
yeah,
can get quite a nice sense. And then but then Dissonant Whispers, it's kind of Fletcher's song, but we all had a significant input on it as well. So then you do
mm.
get a mixture of everyone.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's so cool to just have that kind of dynamic in a
Mhm.
band, And yeah, I was getting at least a bit of a sense of that as well, listening to the record, and I could tell like when Patrick's songs would come up, they'd often be the more kind of industrial,
Yeah.
intense kind of ones. And so yeah, that was very cool. And one thing I really enjoyed in like the booklet credits for the album is that you guys put the credits for who writes the lyrics and who writes the music, which is often a contribution of people.
Mm.
But then you put like creative director or something like that
Yeah.
in on every song, and I found that so intriguing. Would you describe in your own words kind of what the role of the creative
Yeah.
director is for a
So that
song?
was kind of Fletcher's idea because, like I say, if we've got one person maybe leading a particular song, but everybody is obviously still involved because we all have different skill sets and things like that, it's kind of
Mhm.
we kind of want to make it clear whose vision it was and sort of credit that. So he had this idea of, well, on a film and other sort of art forms, you have directors or creative directors and things. So why don't we try applying that to the music? And I think at first I was a little bit like, okay, this is different, but I think it works actually. And I think people do sort of get it when, yeah, they read through the information and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is this kind of person's song, but obviously everyone's all jumped in as well.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like the visionary for the song, I
Mm,
suppose. But
yeah.
I like as well how you said about a film, definitely ties into the cinematic metal thing,
Yes.
right? To almost take a song as like a little film that you're directing. Uh, Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, you do talk about how like every song on the album is a story and things like that. And so it often feels very conceptual, I suppose, with the kind of whole cinematic sound
Mm,
and everything as well. So I know that there is a concept and the theme that you have going through, think these things about the mischievous spirit going all the way back to your first release
yeah.
and first EP, right? So, um, I'm really curious about that. Like, what role does this concept play in the music, and how does that kind of go throughout the album?
Yeah. So it's kind of we haven't as yet got a or we didn't necessarily design it with like a really rigid storyline. It's not quite that sort of
Hmm.
concept, but it's this album, and also there will be a part two at some point. It's basically this little mischievous spirit sort of making sense of the human world and the human experience and all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, because our songs, I mean, you've probably noticed listening to some of them that some of them are a little bit more political, some of them
Hmm.
are a bit more environmental, some of them are slightly more personal and sort of internal, and then more maximalist sort of global issues and things going on. So it's kind of a broad theme and concept that means all of our songs kind of fit into it naturally anyway, because that's just what we tend to write about things like that. Um, but there is also a bit of a concept in mind as to what our future releases do and how they fit in with it as well. So
Hmm.
I guess it's kind of all of our releases, or the plan is that they will all sort of sit in the same universe, so to speak, and they're all sort of happening simultaneously.
Hmm.
I can't really explain too much because I haven't written most of it yet.
Hmm. I get you.
But
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea, that there's all of these sort of intriguing events and things going on that theoretically will all create a sort of nice collection when we've released X amount of albums and EPs and things. So
I
that's
get you.
kind of
Yeah.
where the conceptual stuff comes from. I realize it's also quite vague, but
Yeah.
that's kind of intentional, I think, so that we
Of
can
course.
be quite creative and just sort of do all sorts of things with it. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I love that, man. It's whatever kind of frame helps you guys be creative, right? That's all that matters. There's no right or way wrong way to do these things. But yeah, I'm curious, and I understand that. Yeah, it's vague, but I'm thinking. So the concept of a mischievous spirit, though, is it that this spirit? So the spirit is trying to like understand human nature,
Yeah,
I suppose,
yeah.
and
We sort of
therefore yeah, I was just going to say that,
yeah,
you're exploring in a sense different topics of human nature and the world that we live in. Is
yeah.
it like through the eyes of the spirit, or this spirit is antagonistic, or what?
It's sort of yeah, it's sort of a little bit of both. That it's kind of just encountering different aspects of humanity, and sort of oh, this
Mhm.
is, for example, how humans deal with the environment. This is how humans deal with emotions, or that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
obviously the individual songs are written from different perspectives as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's we were trying to sort of think of, we didn't want to define the mysterious spirit as a particular creature as such, because it's kind
Mhm.
of the fact that it's this inhuman thing that we don't really know what it is kind of
Mhm.
the point, if that makes sense. It's we're not trying
Yeah,
to put human
it's
ideas into a
abstract.
creature.
Mhm.
So that's intentionally a little bit abstract, and then it's yeah, trying to, I mean, obviously we can never fully distance ourselves from what we know, but it's the how do we try and get like a sort of removed as far as possible view on our lives and existence and things like that. So
Mhm. Yeah, I
yeah.
love that. It makes me think of this kind of anecdote where they say like if an alien came to Earth, like what they would think of these things, or
Mm.
what you would show them, type of thing. So it's almost
Yeah.
like you're exploring that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
that sort of
concept.
idea almost. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that. And so I find it interesting for you guys to have music that is perhaps like political in places, or you're kind of conveying strong
Mm.
feelings and takes and emotions on things. Like that's interesting again about the collaborative dynamic and the fact that you're all contributing. Like um does that how does that work with you guys? And do you guys have any kind of conflict or tensions in that, or you respect each other's opinions, or
Yeah,
mm,
I think we're all very much on the same page,
okay,
really. I think with our political alignings and the stuff, which is
that
probably
helps.
fairly evident.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean, with Plague Rats is the most explicitly political song on the album.
Mm,
Um, and it was interesting because Patrick sort of led that one, but I mean, we were all thinking, yeah, we're all kind of mad about this situation. Let's just pour
yeah.
energy and emotion into it and get a creative output
Hmm.
from it. And then he just by chance came across that particular sound bite.
Yeah.
And he just thought, you know what, this fits in the breakdown.
This was like it was like an actual sample from the news, right? From
Yeah,
BBC or
yeah.
something.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that we put that in, and for a while we were a little bit, should we put that in? Should we not put that in? Sort of trying to think, is this a step too far? Is it not? And it's like, you know what? It's something that we're okay with. It's something that we think adds to the song,
Yeah.
and
If
so
that's what you guys are, about, if that's an authentic expression to you guys, especially as a group, and as you say, you're kind of just in a way venting a frustration through that song that many people in the world will be able to connect to.
yeah.
So that's what art's for, right? So
Mm,
I find it amusing. Your use of like the samples and stuff. That one was good, and I obviously commented to you about
yeah,
that one in Delirium where
yeah,
it's like the Windows operating system like
yeah.
malfunctions and goes into this breakdown. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean Delirium is quite an old song. We'd started writing it before the EP came out.
Wow.
So it that and it's funny. I mean, if you ever listen to the first demo, which I don't think we will ever let anybody listen to because it was really bad. Um, but it's sort of how that song has developed over the years as we've got more proficient with like our music tech behind the scenes and also the
Mm.
composition side of things and stuff. It's quite nice for us to be like, you know what, we started out with a song that was a bit rough around the edges and we ended up with this, and like the comments we've had on the song and the music video have just been amazing because I wasn't expecting that many people to like it, and I don't know if it was just because it's so out there or what. I was just thinking I'm not sure people are gonna get it, but they have, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. I think there's so much for people to like there, and I think that you guys have a very even though you're super creative and include all sorts of these other elements and atmospheres, as I say, it does still have a very like fresh modern metal feel, which feels very accessible to metal
That's
fans, of
good.
course.
Yeah.
You've touched a bit on some of this stuff about kind of about the process and the contribution of all of the different members. Um, I'm curious to like kind of get a look of like what does that process actually look like? What does it tend to look like to go
Mhm.
um from start to finish? And the comment that I was going to say that I spaced out on was actually about how much I like the production, and I think the production is
Good.
fantastic,
Yeah.
and so that kind of goes with that kind of cutting edge modern metal type sound. So it sounds very good, kind of, I don't know, competitive in a way. I don't really like that as a term. Yeah, but I do think it has that. So yeah, so as to the process to go from, an initial demo or even before that to a finished product like what you have now, what does that look like?
Yeah, so this is quite interesting, and it sort of comes back to the fact that we all do bits of songwriting because we all songwrite in very different ways, which is interesting. And we make it work, but it's also interesting sometimes to negotiate and work with. So for example, Tim is when he songs write, his sort of beginning process is write a melody on a piano, just on a simple keyboard
Mhm.
sound, and if it sounds good on a piano, it will sound good on a synth, on a guitar, on a whatever you then translate it to. So he's very much get the sort of core riff, the core motif down first, and then
Mhm.
build the song around that. Patrick is very much dive into the synth libraries. What sounds good when you hit it, hit the button? What sort of sound do
Nice.
you get out the speakers? And then he'll put those together and start to build the song that way. I am a bit, I don't know, almost, I don't know if traditional is quite the right word. When I did A-level music and we used to use Sibelius
Mm.
for like bits of composing and stuff. So I now quite like using Guitar Pro just because it's got the music notes and the sort of theory side of it. And I'll tend to sit at a keyboard, work out what chord progression am I doing, what's the verse, what's the chorus, for example. Then I'll put that in Guitar Pro and then build up. Okay, let's put violins, let's put guitars, drums,
Mm.
then export that into our DAW software. So we use Cakewalk, and then that's when it all gets the fancy MIDI virtual instruments going on it and record over
Mhm.
the top and that side of thing. Um, and then Fletch is very he's very chord progression driven, so he focuses just on the chord progressions first, and then we'll layer everything up. And it's interesting because he always wants the music to sound as amazing as possible before vocals come in, whereas I tend to leave space for the vocals and then build the music around it. And that might be because I do vocals a bit more.
Yeah.
So this is where we get different methods coming in. And then Felix is a little bit more new to like composing in the sense of actually getting it down, because they're really good at like sort of folk stuff and just improvising and coming up with things and doing free time stuff. But yeah, so it's we all have these different methods, and then we just try and like mash them together and make it work, and we just about managed to do so.
Wow.
But yeah, and then I guess for the production side of things, we've used a few different engineers, and for the album we decided to go with Brandon Wolf and Jeremy Valentine, who are the guitarist and bassist of New Year's Day, because they do a little production company thing. So yeah, we had a test mix of Human Error and Plague Rats, I think it was, and like it just sounded huge. It just got like this absolutely huge sound, and we're like, you know what, I think these are the guys we're going to go with. So yeah, they were really good to work with, and they seemed to, I think, enjoy our weirdness, which was good, because we do get a little bit nervous sometimes. We send because we've got the orchestral stuff and the synth stuff going on. It's like if we send it to a, I don't know, sort of more just not, generic is not maybe the word I want to look for, but like, someone who just does sort of metal mixing. We send them all of this orchestral stuff and the electronics, and they sort of look at it and they're like, I don't know what to do with this.
For sure.
So that's, finding people has been a sort of process in itself. But they did an amazing job, and they got it, and they were very like if we sent them feedback on stuff, they were super helpful. So I'm glad you like the production, because that is something that we've really been wanting to get as good as possible. So
you pulled it off, and it's great that you've managed to get such a team, so many people contributing to that, and for it to work cohesively is really such a wonderful thing. Especially when you're like gentling like that and things, you want that really massive sound, so and man, it is a real struggle. Like any kind of metal genre, obviously there's infinite subgenres of metal out there now, but when you're having that contrasting elements, symphonic metal or even electronic or whatever, it's like you have this kind of whole thing by itself, like a whole orchestral soundscape of music that takes up like an entire frequency range. And then you have metal, and you're gonna like try and mash them into one thing, and you want both somehow. It's a real challenge, man, trying to mix that.
But yeah, they did a good job, so that was all. And the usual thing is we send them stuff, and all the keyboard parts get turned down by 20 decibels, and we're like, no, turn them back up.
That's what normally happens, and they're like, right, but if you turn it up, it's like you're turning everything else down, so it's going to be like less metal, and it's like we want it all the way metal and all the way like atmospheric, and so
it's a fun balancing act.
As you say, it's definitely typical. Like you hear a lot of you'll have it's a shame, like if you have like symphonic metal and you have like such amazing orchestration, and then it kind of gets like burned down to a little crisp in a lot of mixes, so it is a real challenge. But yeah, it's awesome how you guys have done it, and the fact that not only are you guys bringing in a lot of influences and stuff, but also completely different approaches. That's so intriguing. So I guess a song normally starts with one of you saying, I came up with this, whether it's a guitar pro demo or a little piano melody or a beautiful instrumental. I guess somebody is like, here's this thing I came up with, and then from there, what like literally happens? Are you guys all in a room together? Are you?
Yeah, when we're working together, we're usually all in a room, got computers going, got surrounded by instruments usually.
Nice.
And it's kind of a thing of, okay, today let's work on Delirium, say, and it's like, okay, what do we need? We kind of need more layers in, like there's like a gap in the instruments here. We need to fill that out. We need to balance this, we need to do that. And sometimes it's a case of we just spend a couple of hours scrolling through synth libraries and thinking what would layer in really nicely here.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's, do we have like any little harmony things we can put in? It's in the, I think it's the post chorus. I added in a little bit of a sort of orchestral harmony it just adds a slight darkness to it, so it's fairly subtle, but I just think like in the sort of scheme of the song, you just get this sort of eerie undertone from it. So sometimes it's just really little details we'll spend a while adding in. Or sometimes it's things like, okay, we have a chorus for a song, what we're going to do with the rest of it.
Yeah.
It's like, has anybody got any ideas for a verse? Has anybody got that kind of thing? So
nice.
yeah.
And then you all just resort to your methods of choice. You get on Guitar Pro.
Usually, yeah, it can be a bit chaotic if you've got Fletch on the sat on the in the corner with his guitar, Tim's on the keyboard, Patrick's scrolling, Felix is writing lyrics. Maybe I'm just sat there trying to make sense of everything. It's
Well, at least you're not in the live room with a drummer, because
yeah, that would be
the all things you're trying to talk and the drummer's just like doing their thing. I mean, we've all been there. But I mean, so you guys you guys are programming drums and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, so on our EP, my cousin actually is a drummer, and he's annoyingly talented, really annoying. He did our EP drums live in a studio, and they sounded absolutely amazing. But for the album, we were just partly because one of the reasons we ended up releasing so many singles is because it took us quite a while to finish all of the tracks and then ultimately decide what the final track list was. So I was kind of thinking we need to release some little singles just to, show that we're still alive and we're still kicking in the meantime. So partly because of that, and partly just because he's super busy, we kind of thought we might have to resort to more programmed drums for this. Because unfortunately we do not have a permanent drummer. We have tried. We are looking for a permanent drummer and it's not happening.
It's so tough, man, when you're playing like really intense metal to get somebody that can do that.
Yeah, and this is the problem. We're I'm sure if we ever get a drummer or if because we sometimes get Alex to do like music videos just so we have a full lineup in a video and it looks a bit better. But we send him the stuff and he's just like, what have you written? So that is a slight issue. Yeah.
Well, it's cool. You just gotta find that right person. So I mean, with that in mind, then, so in terms of like the formation of the band, and then you guys must have been, so the first EP I think was 2020 or something.
Yes.
So it's a few years that you've been going. Like what was that kind of thing from you forming to where you are now, and was playing live, has that ever been a part of what you've done, or?
Playing live hasn't happened yet. It's something we would absolutely love to do at some point. I think we're not going to be a touring band as such, but we'd like to get to the point that if we can just do like a few really good quality shows a year or something, I think that's something we can feasibly do a little bit more easily. So that's kind of the goal at some point. It's probably a little way off realistically. And partly because we sort of thought, you know what, let's focus on writing, getting this album done and getting part 2 done, and then we've got like a really good back catalogue of stuff we could choose from when it comes to doing live stuff. What was the question again? Sorry, it's gone now.
Yeah, well, just was that part about playing live, and really just the story of you guys coming together.
Oh yeah. So I Fletch, Tim and Patrick Fletch has been in loads of bands before, and they were sort of starting, this was sort of 2017-ish, they were starting to get together and thinking, okay, they're going to do a project. And then I ended up meeting them around then, and they found out that I do music stuff. I was like, oh, you should come along and we'll see what happens. So I sort of got indoctrinated into the band that way. And at that point, they had quite a few demos ready to go, and some of those turned into what was the EP. And And it was quite funny because I joined as a guitarist. I'd almost sort of decided I'm not interested in vocals. I'm just going to do guitars because that's, I'll just stand there and strum. It'll be great. Um, and then they found out that I can sort of sing, and then all of a sudden it was you should do vocals as well. So
Yeah, adds more
um,
dynamic.
so I got drawn into doing that as well, which is why it's listening to the EP is interesting because I mean you can tell listening back that my voice isn't the strongest on those recordings because I was like fairly new to it and new to recording vocals, especially for original stuff. Um, but yeah, no, it's got more comfortable as it's gone on, and part of it is just figuring out what suits your voice. I think
Mhm.
that's actually the hardest part.
Mhm.
And I'm still trying to figure it out. But yeah, I think with the songs on this album, it's a bit more. I'm sort of working out what I can do and what I can't do, and what
Mhm.
makes the best of it. So yeah. But yeah, so it was the four of us for the EP, and then Felix does feature on the EP. They have all sorts of lovely little folk instruments, and they had a little kalimba, which we put on the Mischievous Spirits track, but they sort of just wanted to like appear as a guest, so to speak.
Mm.
And then a couple of years down the line, we were like, you should just join the band.
Nice.
So that's how we ended up with the five of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, definitely so cool to have, especially for you guys where your whole thing is like getting so many elements together. And so yeah, you have like harsh vocals, clean male vocals, clean female vocals, and then to have a member that can just do all sorts of different
Mhm.
things, bust out a violin or a kalimba, yeah, it's so
It's
cool.
great.
It's such a great it's a great setup.
Yeah.
And for yourself as a vocalist, I suppose, yeah, it's an interesting journey. And I think that that's a really great point about finding your voice,
Mm.
because we all have a voice, we're all human beings. And it's interesting because you can easily get locked into, I don't know, being good at singing.
Yeah.
But really, a voice is so much about character. And that's why, as you say, it's about finding what's authentic to you. And, obviously, you've really come into doing this. It works with you to do a sort of ethereal, atmospheric, gothic kind
Yeah.
of voice, right? And that's so much about what you're into, from what I gather. And obviously, if you're trying to like bust out like Tina Turner or something, then it's not necessarily going to suit you, and you're going
Yeah.
to feel bad about yourself. So,
Yeah, this is the thing. I think for a while I sort of tried to do the more sort of aggressively powerful stuff.
yeah.
I mean, I would love to try harsh vocals at some point. That's on the wish list down the line. But with clean sort of trying to, yeah, belt and do that sort of thing. And I might be able to do it if I have the right training, and that's maybe something to look into, but I don't think my voice naturally sits there. And
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, actually, you know what? I can do kind of creepy vibes, and I can do the weird ethereal stuff. And I quite enjoy doing that as well. And it's kind of that's powerful in a slightly different way, I
Mhm.
think. Um, so it's kind of a bit of a, yeah, okay, let's lean that way because I can do that and it's a bit more comfortable in my range and
Mhm.
stuff. But it was quite interesting because I was always sort of singing in a higher register. Um, and then we did, you might have seen, we've done various different Christmas covers over the years. It's become
Yeah.
a weird tradition. It's just something we do. Um, and it was the year we did, um, I think it was the second one we did, Spaceman Came Traveling by Christopher. Love that song. Absolutely love that song. And trying to fit into the key of it. And I started using low vocals for the first time, and all the guys were just like, "You've got really good low vocals." And I was like, I thought they were dreadful. That's why I'd never bothered with them before. Um, but they seemed to really like it. So that was kind of opened another avenue of, oh, okay, I can kind of do dark, low stuff. Um, and that's worked out quite well. I mean, it's quite interesting. Obviously, you've spoken to Tom DeWitt of
Yeah.
Dreamwalkers Inc. He asked me to do the voice of the wonderful ethereal goddess on it.
Mhm.
Um, and it was interesting because he again sort of specifically asked, "Oh, can you do the really low ethereal voice with it?" I was like, "Okay, this is the thing. This is cool. I can do
Yeah.
that." So
Nice.
yeah,
That's it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's all about just finding your thing, right? And yeah, being authentic in that. So yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, I really I enjoyed your appearance on
Ah,
the
thank
Dream of the
you.
Zinc album. That was that's an awesome record as well.
Mm,
Yeah, obviously with Split the Tom a few episodes ago. And
yeah,
yeah, it's so awesome. I love how all that's come together. And I'm curious, kind of now you've touched upon that, like you know, have you personally, like, you've been working on any other projects? I know, in fact, you have another project with Fletch, right?
yes,
Sensory Enigma, that's the one.
yeah.
Um,
Um, it's funny. We've got a bit of a running joke that I've been saying for the past 4 years now, 3 years, that I will finish the album this year, and it still
right, right.
hasn't happened.
Yeah, well,
So
it's a lot of work.
it is, though. It still exists, and I will finish it one day. It's currently about half finished. Maybe this year, we'll see. But yeah, there's sort of created that project almost as a little bit of a response to Disconnected Souls in a way, in the sense of, because Disconnected Souls is so maximalist, it's so
Mm,
everything going on, and obviously it's quite guitar heavy, and that's my main instrument. With Sensory Enigma, I thought, okay, what happens if I do a project where there's no guitars? Um, and we're not using anywhere near as many layers of instruments. We've just got to use minimal layers, but make as big a sound as possible.
mm,
So that's, yeah, quite electronic-y, quite gothic-y, creepy, quite inspired by bands like Nightclub, where you've got a lot, so there's a little bit of an industrially electronic element, and it's designed to be a bit upbeat as well. But yeah, so it's fun to do because it is so different from everything else.
mhm.
It's just the new album isn't finished.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, yeah, these things take time, man. An album
They
is an
do.
extraordinary amount of work. And I suppose even more of it is on you with this project, right? Because you don't have
Yeah, I
this
think
whole
the
team of other
problem
guys.
is yeah, I with Sensory Enigma, I kind of thought, oh, it would be good to lead this project, and I didn't consider how much time it would take.
For sure.
Um, and then last year, brilliantly, a friend of mine, Jonah Vaughn, she's based in Texas. She does all sorts of electronic-y, rock metal, sort of gothic-y type sound in her music. She messaged me and said, "Oh, would I do guitars for a track?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's great." And then it turned into, we should write an album together. So we're doing that.
Nice.
Um, so I won't say any more on that just yet because we haven't
Mhm.
announced it officially. But
Cool.
it's definitely in the works, and the album is almost finished. But yeah, that's one of those projects I said yes to without considering how much
Yeah,
time it would also take. But there we go.
of course. Yeah, yeah. It sounds like, you're somebody that has a lot of things going on. So, as you say, a lot of fingers and a lot of pies. So,
Yeah.
gotta manage those things. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds awesome. Sounds like a lot of cool creative stuff. I mean, with that in mind, I'm curious to take it right back to the beginning and kind of get an idea of where you actually first started in music, and then kind
Okay.
of how you worked from there to where you are now.
Yeah. So I mean, when I grew up with, my dad loved rock and metal, so I was always exposed to it from a young age. And I started having piano lessons first, actually, when I was about 6 years old. And I enjoyed it, but I mean, my piano teacher, she was lovely, but she was quite a traditional, sort of strict classical teacher. And as a 6 year old, that's a little bit terrifying. And I'd start, yeah, about 7, 8 years old, I was getting more and more into the rock and metal side of things, and they'd started offering guitar lessons at my primary school. So I just sort of said to my parents, can I swap my piano lessons for guitar lessons because they look a bit more fun?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not leaving music, I just want to swap. And they said yes. um and then that kind of, yeah, kicked off the whole sort of journey, I guess, really. um I did little bits of vocal lessons in the midst of it. And I kind of, I mean, I enjoyed doing it, but I didn't think I was, sort of like good enough to pursue it. But I thought, oh, so I'll just stick to guitar side of things. And then I discovered symphonic metal when I was a teenager. I was like, oh, you can be a woman in metal and sing and do all this. This is cool. Um, So I kind of got into that, and I remember when I was 16 doing I did like an acoustic cover of Stand My Ground by Within Temptation at this little showcase. And that was kind of like my first, oh, I can do this. This is really cool. Um, but yeah, and then I was in a few bands over the years, and that was interesting. My main my main high school band, we all had quite different music tastes,
Yeah.
so it was never gonna last. But we did everything from we mostly did covers in the end, everything from like Arctic Monkeys to Rage Against the Machine. Um and I was mostly doing guitar for those. And it was good fun. It was really good fun. But I was like, I wanted to start doing heavier stuff and they didn't. And it was like, so, it was good experience, but it was never really gonna go anywhere. Um, but yeah, and then I ended up when I went away to uni, I had a couple of years or so of just not really being with other musicians because I did an English degree for my undergraduate and for my master's as well. So I was kind of slightly separated from music for a little bit. But then, yeah, I met Fletch and everyone and got pulled into Disconnected Souls. And then that kind of like relit the spark and everything has just been chaos in the best possible way since then. So that's basically how I got here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's yeah, really cool story. And I'm curious just for a bit of fun, I suppose. You mentioned like a rock kind of phase, from when you were quite young. You mentioned obviously symphonic metal being a big revelation as it is to many. And you mentioned specifically Within Temptation. I was curious maybe just to pull out a few more bands, like when you were 7, 8 years old, that kind of like those rock bands, what was really doing it for you? What was massive?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I got into AC/DC because
Nice.
my dad was playing classic rock all the time. So Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, all that sort of classics. But I really got into Muse and I really gelled with that. And I guess that was probably my first exposure to like electronics and the classical elements,
Right.
particularly with Matt's piano playing, with the rock side of things. And yeah, and then the Rasmus they were on Top of the Pops in like, was it
Yeah.
2003 within in the
In the
Shadows? I
Shadows,
remember that.
something like it was massive, that song.
I
Yeah.
love that song. And I
So
remember
good. Yeah.
I think it was like, Woolworths was open and I went and got the CD from there. So
Walrus. Oh
it was
yeah.
like, oh,
Nice.
I know. So I remember doing all of that. And yeah, and then it was getting into symphonic metal. That was my mum worked with a guy who was big rock and metal head, and he used to like burn me CDs with basically loads of
Amazing.
different tracks on and be like, oh, Holly might like this and try all this. And he gave me a copy of Delane's album April Rain, and that was the
Nice.
first symphonic metal album that I fully got into. And I was like, I love this, and I liked singing along to it, and I could kind of similar-ish range to Charlotte Vessels, so I can kind of sing it a little bit. And I ended up going to see Delane basically every year when I was a teenager. That was the
Nice.
band I would go and see. And it was kind of good because like my mum she quite likes some metal, but she's not full on, death metal is probably not really her thing. But then
Sure.
she really got into symphonic metal as well. So it was like she was
Nice.
like, yeah, and my dad's all obviously into everything. So they would be like, yeah, we'll come, we'll take you. It's all good.
Cool.
So yeah, and it grew from there. It's interesting because bands like Nightwish actually took me a little bit longer to get into them.
Mhm.
I think at first I was a bit, I'm not sure about this, but then it was kind of songs like Amaranth and Bye Bye Beautiful, those two with Annette as the
Yeah. So
vocalist.
Annette coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think they were slightly more accessible. They were the
Sure.
first ones that I was like, oh, actually, I got into them, and then obviously got into the fancier, more experimental side of
Yeah, I
what they
mean,
do.
those kind of took out the such emphasis on opera, didn't they? Like
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah,
But that's it's so cool to hear you say, because I mean, it's great that like Delane was the gateway band for you, because like, man, the amount of episodes we've done, it's like all comes back to Nightwish, man.
yeah.
So many. It was always like, and then Nightwish,
Yeah.
which is awesome. It's just such a pivotal band. And that and Evanescence, of course,
Yeah.
because
Oh
again,
yeah.
they were, at that same time with Rasmus and things like that. It was just huge, kind of commercial success. But yeah, cool that it was Delane and that you had a slightly different thing with Nightwish.
Yeah.
It's also funny to hear the parallels because, we obviously both grew up in Britain, probably about the same age. So, yeah, it's funny you're talking about Woolworths,
I know.
and then and as well, like having a friend that burnt CDs. Funnily enough, it was my aunt that burnt me CDs. She burnt me like the discographies of Nightwish and Within
Oh wow.
Temptation. And that's where I first got those, from burnt CDs, which you would never burn CDs
I
now.
know.
I mean, how pointless. But yeah, it's a moment in time.
I know. It's funny. Every now and again I go back through my CDs and I've still got like a little pile of just burnt, track
Yeah,
lists,
me
some that I
too.
made
Yeah.
myself, some that I've given. I'm just like, oh, nobody knows what these are anymore. Nobody
Yeah,
knows.
relics. Yeah, I have a box of them somewhere too. Yeah, it's funny, man. But really cool that your parents were like into that and supportive of that and going to gigs with you and stuff. That must have been really cool too.
I think that really helped as well because I mean there were people at my school who kind of liked some of it, but I don't think they were ever quite as
Mm,
full on into it as me. So it did take me a little while to kind of find friendship group who was like, yeah, we'll go and see Spirit Box together and and do that
mhm,
side of things. Um but yeah, and it helped obviously with the guitar lessons and the gigs and everything and the
mhm.
being in the band. They were very supportive. So I was very lucky with all that. Yeah.
So when you got into symphonic metal and that kind of stuff, was it around that kind of time, or was it kind of further before you kind of went into like more extreme kind of harsh vocal heavy stuff?
Yeah, symphonic metal. Yeah, Delane was definitely the probably the gateway, and then
Mm,
obviously through them because I discovered that Martin was the used to being Within Temptation and his brother was in it. So I was like, oh, found them, and then got into Epica,
mm,
and then yeah, slowly then got into Nightwish and Floor Jansen and everything else. So but yeah, it was sort of them first. I think what came next. I'm not sure. I mean, the really extreme stuff is actually relatively recent for me in some ways.
mhm,
I think it's because I really like the sort of more highly produced heavy stuff. So like modern
mhm.
deathcore and modern metal, I think is a little bit more to my preference than the really old school death metal.
Got
I
you.
mean, I
Yeah.
still like it and I still listen to it, but I think I like the sort of use of electronics, even if it's just that
Mhm,
one eerie synth or guitar line you get in a deathcore song that just runs through the entire thing. Um, I kind of prefer that sound a little bit more, and I
mhm.
I do like this sort of. I like the mixture of the really harsh vocals and some clean as well, just because I think from a textural point of view,
Yeah.
I think it's really cool and how bands use that to interplay stuff. And so like with Vexed, I really like the way Megan does her cleans and then just delivers these most amazing like harsh vocals. I just think,
Yeah.
how do you do that? That's so cool.
Totally. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
always something I loved so much about. For me, it was Opeth, but
Um,
it's just the way he has
mm,
such a nice kind of voice and then such brutal guttural vocals. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, so cool. I mean, contrast, right? It's all about that dynamic, and
mm.
I guess old school death metal is just like constant, like
It is a little bit. I think that's the
and
thing.
it's like kind of crummy production value a lot of the time, and yeah, very niche in that way. So yeah, I get you. But I mean, as a guitarist, then would you say that you kind of have you always first and foremost seen yourself as a guitarist then, and would you say that's the same now?
I think so. I mean, it's interesting. Nowadays, I'm I'm much more comfortable sort of just whether it's sitting down at a keyboard or doing the guitar, they're probably equalish for me nowadays.
Mm,
For a long time I was definitely guitar first. Um, it's funny when I was little, I mean, particularly like with Muse and obviously all their amazing guitarists and everything that they do, I was like, I want to be a lead guitarist and I want to do all of
mm.
these solos and things. And nowadays, I absolutely don't want to do any of that. I just want to do ones and zeros on my eight
Yeah, that's
string,
it.
because it's fun. And
Yeah, that's it.
um,
I think you just
so
defined the trend of metal music in general.
basically, that's all it is. It's so simple when you break it down.
Yeah.
But it's so effective. So it'll be interesting. I bet I know in like 5-10 years time it will be back to no, do guitar leads, do guitar solos again.
Maybe. Yeah.
Probably something like that.
Yeah, well, now it's that you have
Yeah.
to do all sorts of weird stuff where, I don't know, it's all backwards, or you're like tapping it or
Yeah.
something, or like slapping. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know what the kids do these days.
No, I mean some of the really technical stuff yeah, I can't do. I mean, it's quite interesting. I have really small wrists, which unfortunately
Yeah,
does.
for an eight, you said you're playing an 8 string, right?
Yeah, so my 8 string guitar is the one 8 string that I tried that I can play comfortably. It's
Wow.
like I'd love. I'm actually no, I did find at Tech Fest last year there was a company from the Netherlands who make guitars out of, don't know if it was resin. It was a sort of plastic composite almost type material. Really interesting. But they had this gorgeous 9 string and it was comfortable. And I was like, oh my
Wow.
God, I can play a 9 string because
No.
normally I can't. Unfortunately, I didn't buy it because it's very expensive, but it's very nice and I know it exists. So maybe one day.
Gives you hope.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are unfortunately some slight physical limitations with that, and I have Raynaud's or suspected Raynaud's and things like that.
Oh,
So
really?
it's like, yeah, realistically, I'm never going to be a shredder just because it's a bit uncomfortable. But I like doing rhythm nowadays anyway, and so
Hmm.
it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And so, at what point did you get into like getting an 8 string? I mean, or did you go via 7 and like it's a bit of a jump, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a jump. Yeah, it was Tim actually. He got his 8 string first. And so I was so interested and I had a go on it and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I was debating it. Do I get a 7 or do I get an 8? And it's kind of like, well, if you get an 8 string, then you've also got a 7 string. So it sort of makes more
Yeah.
sense to do that.
You just
Um,
have to get your wrist around it.
you just have to figure it out. So yeah, I spent a while researching and found this gorgeous one. It's a sort of limited oh God, what's it called? It's a limited crossover, but it's got gorgeous EMG pickups and it's
Mhm.
so nice. So nice.
Nice.
They don't make it anymore, actually, unfortunately. It's now no longer exists. But it was great because it was on the website, it was £666, and I was like, you know what, that's a sign.
Wow, that's it. It's gotta be done. They knew it. They were like, all right, should we discount this to 670?
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, but it was kind of a but yeah, it tied in with my degree because my mum said as a joke, if you get a first in your bachelor's, we'll get you an 8 string.
Wow,
Um,
nice.
and I had so much fun the day that I texted her saying, look, I got the first. She's like, we're
Oh,
never
nice.
promising you anything ever again. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of so yeah,
Nice.
that was when it started, and I just yeah.
Yeah, stuck ever since. Do you like exclusively play your 8 string then, or?
I kind of do. I have a really nice reconditioned Tokai of all the
Cool.
guitars. It's bright sunburst color, so it's not, for someone who lives in black clothes most of the time, it's quite a contrast.
Uh-huh.
But it's really nice. It was in really good condition. So I do like playing that one actually, but I think there's something about the 8 string though that is just
Yeah,
quite
satisfying.
fun. And
Yeah.
it's the whole, I mean, 8 strings are a bit ludicrous in the respect that I have never seen anyone actually use all 8 strings
That's the
in
thing.
one
You could
song.
just tune down a 6 string, really,
Well,
couldn't
you
you?
could
But
also
it's
do that,
like blah blah
exactly.
blah. Don't tell
Yeah,
tell me
yeah, yeah.
that.
No, you
I want
absolutely could.
8.
You absolutely could. And the same with 9, you can tune a 6 string down to a 9 string tuning,
Yeah.
and that's great
Yeah.
fun. But there is just something a little bit ridiculous and good fun about
Yeah.
having a guitar that just has 8 strings on it, just for the fun of it. And
Yeah. I don't know if this is sacrilege, but to be honest, I've just got in the habit now of like using the pitch, like auto pitches,
oh
like
yeah, we do that.
yeah. So I can keep the guitars in just a standard tune now, and
Yeah.
then like whatever I want right in that given moment. Oh, so much more convenient, man.
Oh, it makes life so much easier. So I am very much in favor of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. But you touched upon something that I'm certainly intrigued by as well. You said right at the beginning that you were doing a degree in heavy metal. And you said you did a degree in English. So I'm taking a total guess here and thinking, did you go from English into journalism into heavy metal?
Not quite. Yeah, my bachelor's degree was a combined English language and literature course, and I ended up doing my dissertation on the Bronte sisters.
Right,
And
cool.
then I did a master's in Victorian literature and culture, as you
Nice.
do. So very
Yeah,
academic.
that's goth life right there.
Exactly. But yeah, so no, because I love history. I love that period in particular, the long
Yeah,
19th century. It's fascinating.
totally.
Um, but then one of my professors, ever since my undergrad, she's sort of been hinting you could do a PhD, and she's a metalhead herself and knew I did music and everything. And she's like, you could do a PhD in metal. That could be a thing. And I just sort of went, yeah, whatever. Maybe one day. And then obviously with the pancetta, we'll call it that. That happened. I just started thinking a little bit of like, well, actually, you know what, you don't really know what's going to happen in life, and I might plan to do a PhD down the line, and it might just not happen. So I just dropped her an email and said, I'm interested in doing a PhD. I'm interested in doing something that's in heavy metal. What do you think? And she responded pretty quickly saying, yes, that's a marvelous idea. Here's the application form.
It's like I can't wait to
So
read it. Yeah,
it
read
was,
that
yeah,
dissertation. You know.
but it must have been the quickest PhD application ever, because normally, it takes a
Nice.
while for people to find the right supervisors
Mm.
um and things like that. So it was just very good coincidence that she's English lecturer, knows everything. She runs the Department of Gender Studies at Chester and is also a metalhead. So that basically combines all the knowledge I need into
Yes,
one supervisor.
perfect. Yeah,
So yeah, I started, and then I have a wonderful second supervisor who she's senior in the music department, and she's been in death metal bands and done everything and knows everyone and is amazing. So I'm
awesome.
very fortunate. I have the dream team basically for a metal PhD.
Wow.
Mm.
So what
Yeah.
does doing a metal PhD look like? Like what's the day to day of that?
Yeah, so for me, it's my kind of thesis is looking at why is it that from a sort of social cultural perspective, heavy metal is seemingly intrinsically linked with masculinity, because ultimately it's a musical genre. So why
Mm,
is it that there are certain cues, whether it's the low pitch, whether it's the imagery, whether it's the themes,
mm,
why is that so sort of
interesting.
almost integrally linked with our Western ideas of masculinity? And then how does that realistically affect people in different spaces of the metal scene? Because obviously, like, say, a live venue is quite different to the sort of privacy of a recording studio, and these interactions between people are so different in these different spaces.
Mm,
Um, so I'm basically unpicking all of that in my thesis, or
yeah.
trying to, and sort of looking at, are there is there anything we can do to like improve the subculture? Because obviously it's changing for the better all the time, and there's
Mhm.
been some amazing developments, and we're seeing so much more intersectional equality than we have been, but there are still obviously pockets of misogyny and racism and quite big issues that go on sometimes within the industry, and because they're like hidden away and you don't see it, we don't realize there's these systems that kind of prevent equality in certain spaces. So it's
Mm.
yeah, it's kind of my very small attempt to make a positive change through
Nice, yeah.
academia, and we'll see how it goes. But it's very interesting, and I've had some really good positive responses to the work that I've done so far. So that's really encouraging. And because my
Yeah.
main concern was, are people going to find it interesting?
Mm.
Um, and so far people are seem to be finding it interesting. So
It
that's
sounds very interesting. And I mean it sounds very like topical as well, relevant to culture
yeah.
where it's at right now. So yeah, I mean I'm certainly very intrigued by that. In terms of you saying the work, is that like is it a lot of like research and then essays that you're writing? Is that
Yes,
essentially what it
so
is?
it's very much a sort of essays, humanities based PhD for me.
Mm,
I haven't incorporated any performance elements into it as such. So yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, there is sort of metal studies as an academic discipline is relatively new. It's sort of the 90s is when we started getting actual sort of academic work being published on it. And there's a wonderful little society called the International Society for Metal Music Studies, and it's so small, but it's growing nicely. So it's a nice little area. I mean, it's one of those things, obviously, when you say to someone, I'm doing a metal PhD, I kind of get two responses, either oh, that's really interesting, or is that a real PhD? It's kind of the
Right, I see.
two sides of the coin. It's not necessarily taken seriously like some academic disciplines, which is interesting when you consider how many people are involved in heavy metal across the world, whether they work in it or listen to it. And you think, well, there are all of these people who are having experiences, and that's important, I think, to sort of explore and share people's experiences. So
absolutely.
yeah.
I think that's fascinating because I'm sorry to cut you up, but I just think that, like, I guess in a way it's like, I think the more appropriate question is like, if you feel that innate rejection is like, what is a heavy metal PhD? And I think that, I'm really intrigued by what you're saying, because it's not necessarily what I thought it was. My mind maybe kind of went to almost like a musicology kind of like, I don't know, if you were making a documentary on heavy metal or something and talking about influential artists or something. Whereas actually it really very much sounds like it's a humanities degree kind of focusing on this particular subculture and exploring that, which is a fascinating topic.
For me, it is. I mean, I'm hoping to incorporate maybe some musicology elements, just because I mean, part of my sort of thesis idea is that because heavy metal is so multifaceted, you've got obviously the visual artwork, and then there's lyrics, and then there's photography and videography, and all of these layers. It's not just the audio, and all of these sort of add up to be cultural factors and things. Like you walk down the street, you see someone wearing a Megadeth t-shirt, you're like, you're a metalhead. I identify with you, is what I'm trying to say. So we have those little social cues of like recognition and things, which is fascinating. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of work in metal studies that is certainly more musicology focused. But for me, I thought I feel like I can bring more to the cultural side of things at the moment. I mean, it's fascinating when you do a PhD, when you sort of pitch your idea, and all the way throughout, they constantly ask you, what is your original contribution to knowledge? And that's a terrifying question. And they don't expect you to be entirely original, but you sort of got to add a little original thing into obviously the existing body of work. And that's, for me, that's a little bit of a sort of autoethnographical side of things, because I'm quite fortunate that I can, as a musician, I see these spaces as like a PR agent. I see that side of the industry, and it's what I feel is lacking a little bit in academia at the moment is those behind the scenes spaces, because there are lots of academics who are fans of metal and are writing about it, and that's fabulous. And some people are maybe more journalists, but they sort of omit the entire industry behind the scenes. And it's like, well, that's where the sort of cogs are going. That's where all the marketing comes from. That's where all of our ideas about what bands are the ones to be listening to, the trends and all of that. That's sort of where that comes from. So that's kind of my original-ish, hopefully, contribution to show that side of things.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think, as you say, it's very important, especially because music is ultimately a part of the entertainment business, which means what's on the front end is all the show, So if you want to really get into what's real about it, you need to get into the back end, right? So yeah, I thought that was cool because obviously you mentioned your supervisor being like a metalhead and running like gender studies and such, and so now it makes sense, like how that's essentially relevant to the degree that you're doing. And I'm curious, obviously this is something you're working on, but maybe just to get a little bit of an idea, just I'm curious about the topic, like where are you kind of at with your thesis on this? Like you started with saying about metal culture, I suppose, being seen as being so masculine. Why is that? And I suppose you're contribution is about kind of promoting equality, I suppose, within the metal subculture. So what is your experience, and where is your kind of thesis of that at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm a third year part-time PhD, so in that respect I'm, I guess, still slightly newish. Um my I have sort of some drafts of a thesis writing, and I'm sure it will evolve. I'm absolutely sure it will evolve over the next few years. I did do a very interesting sort of data collection study last year, which I'm still in the realms of writing up from, because I got so much data, which was great, but it was also so much. And I did a weird little method called story completion. So it's a little bit like, you know, the whole sort of ink blot thing. Your psychiatrist shows you an ink blot and it's like, what do you see? It's almost like that, but in written form. Sort of provide people with a few different story stems, so just a few sentences that sort of establish a scenario, and just sort of give it to them and say, can you finish off the story in like 500 words, that sort of thing. But it was all heavy metal related, so my little stories were set in different spaces. So one was in like a music studio, one was like a vocal lesson, one was just two friends who like metal having a chat. And I sent it out to people who are journalists or record label owners, or basically across the industry, musicians, photographers. And yeah, I haven't got the final sort of results, because it needs a little bit more teasing out just yet. But it's really interesting, because then you're getting people's perspectives on these spaces who are in it, which hopefully avoids some of the stereotyping, because there is a little bit, I find, in some academic writing that is still a bit stereotypical in terms of metal, and I'm of the opinion that that doesn't help. So part of my thing is, if I can get the voices and experiences of the people who are actually in metal and work in it, and rather than sort of just assumptions that wider society puts onto the subculture, because I think that doesn't help as well. So that's going on, and I've got a conference in Liverpool in a couple of weeks that's all about like underground radio, and how does that help rock and metal subculture with like smaller bands and getting heard and things like that. So that's been interesting, writing a paper for that. And I've gone down the slightly philosophical route, as you do. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Irving Goffman and ideas of like interaction ritual, and there's someone called Batkin who wrote about a lot about counterculture, and as metal is so much a rejection of the mainstream, that sort of fits in as a counterculture, and how underground radio really helps to sort of provide a space almost that these small bands and lesser known artists can actually, you know, engage in it and discover new people and share their own music. And so I find it interesting to do.
Fascinating. It's so fascinating. I mean, I feel like these are things that, you know, I think about, but certainly not to the depth that you clearly do, obviously, in studying that. So I find it really fascinating. I love find it very intriguing, just whatever human nature in general, but to think especially philosophically about whatever counterculture as a whole, especially in metal, because, you know, it's awesome, but just you know, as an art form. So I mean, how would you put like what would you put as the kind of driving motivation of counterculture, especially in relation in relative terms to metal music? And what is it about? What is it really, you know, getting us on that deeper level?
I mean, it's fascinating with metal, because obviously there's so many rejections of the mainstream, in whether it's sort of like aesthetically, particularly the sort of traditional aesthetic associated with metalheads, and the music being so not just extreme in terms of loudness or dynamics or that sort of thing, but the subject matter, the themes, the explicitness of the lyrics is something that is so almost taboo still in mainstream. It's like, you know what, we don't really talk about death, we don't really talk about this sort of stuff that explicitly, and it's like metal particularly seems to be a space of sort of catharsism, because it's like, you know what, we are going to talk about the dark stuff, and it doesn't mean that we're miserable, it just means that we're not running away from it, we're kind of acknowledging it and making it our own, and it's an art form, and it's expression, and it's about connecting with people and emotions. And because I find it fascinating sort of ideas that you know, particularly like death metal and stuff, they say, oh, it's just noise, you can't tell what the lyrics are, there's no emotion. And it's like, I'd argue death metal is so emotional. Like, it's different types of emotion and different means of expressing it, but surely all, or at least most metal subgenres are very much like exposing really passionate emotions or deep emotions and things like that. So I find it fascinating, as it's almost a rebellion of, you know what, we are actually just going to be open with each other about all this dark stuff, and but we connect, and it's the fan base is so reciprocal and more community like, I suppose, than some genres. So it's, yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it, or at least how I view it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I personally love thinking about, you know, just the power of music in general. It's just a topic that fascinates me so much. And so therefore, catharsis is a huge part of it, whether you're creating music or just enjoying it. And I think that's the thing, yeah, metal music especially is just like hugely cathartic, because as you say, even something like that, even death metal that's just noise, that, as you say, is actually just raw emotion. You know, I mean, I have a toddler, and when he gets like frustrated, he just screams and yells, and there's something so honest about that, you know. It's like we all know that feeling, we just behave ourselves as adults, you know. But there's something about that, like, and you can do that as a toddler, not as an adult, unless you're in a death metal band.
Exactly.
And then
then it's
out, you know.
and it's great. So it's but it's sort of fascinating to me, this idea of space, that like, yeah, if you're at a metal gig, it's, you can go in the mosh pit and scream your lungs out and run around and it's fine, but you probably won't do that in the office at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, because it's not the right space for it. So it's it's kind of fascinating, the social etiquette, I suppose you could call it, of metal.
So do you think there's something in terms of the kind of gender equality of it, that like this, I don't know, this kind of cathartic aggression is considered more masculine or more like acceptable perhaps for men, and therefore, I don't know, women are kind of expected to be more decent perhaps, and therefore it's, I don't know, unladylike?
There's certainly, I think, elements of that. It's this is right, okay. Well, I'm just trying to decide where to start now. There's kind of a there's this idea that obviously metal is a counterculture, but you can never be fully removed from the mainstream. So all of the sort of patriarchal gender attitudes that exist in the mainstream, unfortunately, do get dragged over into metal a little bit, at least. And there are sort of aspects of it being like what is called a sort of homosocial space, where it's like, it's a masculine space for sort of men to express whatever they need to express, which is great. But when it becomes sort of exclusionary to other groups who also need a space to just sort of vent or let themselves go, that's when it becomes problematic. And we see it still, unfortunately, with women musicians. You know, there's expectations of, you have to not just sound a certain way, but look a certain way. And obviously there are very much issues around appearance that are applied to men as well. And I'm absolutely not trying to suggest that they have it either, because you don't. But there's those sort of cultural things of, you've got to look a certain way and do certain things, and it's only acceptable under certain conditions. And I mean, it's fascinating still, some of the language that's used around women in metal, whether it's just people commenting online or whether it's even journalists at times. And it sort of subtly promotes this kind of idea that it is a masculine space and women are sort of being allowed into it a little bit, but we'll never fully quite belong there. But because it's so sort of normalized, a lot of people sort of think, well, there isn't really sexism in metal, because look, we do have women bands and we do have women in the industry. And it's like, yeah, but you have sort of normalized the fact that in certain circumstances these women are being judged for their appearance, whereas their male equivalents aren't.
Mm.
Or things like that, or it's acceptable
Mm.
for women to play these and acceptable for men to do whatever instruments, whatever they want. But if women do certain things, it's not quite so okay. And it's, yeah, how do we change that mentality that it's just metal and anybody can do any role and be sort of welcomed and embraced in it. So it's not an easy fix by any means.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of people, it's funny because as kind of counterculture as metal ultimately is, and therefore it's got this kind of rebellious anarchistic element to it, there is actually also a lot of like conservatism in metal, right? And there is a lot of just old dudes that want things the way that they want them. So it's interesting, but it also is very dynamic because, as you say, like metal is, it's a culture in itself, but it's a part of the larger culture. And actually, in this day and age where music is much more like we all kind of like a bit of everything, it's all catered to our own taste rather than maybe before where you were kind of in this lane or that lane in terms of the charts or whatever. So, yeah, I feel like you have all kinds of people in metal now, and you certainly have many, many more women becoming prominent, right, in the genre or, so. What do you think the fix is, and do you think it's getting better?
I think it is certainly getting better. I think the hardest bit is just a little sort of almost there's a term called everyday sexism, and it's this sort of idea of really small actions that are almost just ignored because they're so normal. And that's kind of even in mainstream culture, that's the hardest thing to change because people don't do things intending to be sexist. They don't actually register when they're doing it as an issue. But it's subtly reinforcing status quo, so to speak. So it's how do we subtly change that mentality? So yeah, the thing can be like with journalists and the music media, how they present women. And we're seeing this a lot. It is improving, certainly in some areas, but there are still those little underground blogs where you
especially in Europe. Yeah, those
especially
European
in
ones
Europe where you get some interesting articles, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, it's wonderful that say Metal Hammer or Notfest or whatever are being very much like, look at these amazing artists, look at these women, look at these people from the global south, from other countries in the global north, really sort of trying to push a little bit more. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect, but they are making more of an effort to try and put people in the visible space, so it's more normalized to see all sorts of people in metal. And then those little underground blogs where you're thinking, not sure about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it is a funny one though, and I think that there's a tricky part of it which like I'm completely understand basically all of that, and I go with that. And I think the one thing I've been intrigued by is this like female fronted metal, that kind of stuff, and these kind of terms and this kind of, and I find it interesting because I understand how that can be problematic, right? Because as you say, it's kind of promoting this disparity, like the fact that you have to kind of say that it's female fronted. It kind of presents a problem inherently. But then at the same time, it's like, from a kind of marketing perspective, we use niche terms. Like in fact, the more we can kind of niche it down, the better. And therefore, if you can kind of really get a profile of this kind of person that's into this particular kind of stuff, then it helps. At which point, the fact that a band is essentially female fronted or whatever could have a pretty significant implication in terms of somebody's music taste, because there are people that just like that certain type of energy, right, in the music. So I like to have heavy music, but with like a female vocal range that offers this kind of contrast, right? So I find it really curious because it's like, I understand the problematic nature and how we could do with progressing in this, but also it's like, how do we kind of address that in a way that kind of balances it out? Do you know?
I mean, I find it difficult sort of both with sort of promoting myself a bit and also sometimes promoting other bands, because it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we can absolutely use the term female fronted to get people in front of others, and you think, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing, because the more people we get, you know, in front of the metal audience, the more it becomes normalized, and yeah, the stereotypes hopefully over time will disappear, and you do get reach. And the unfortunate reality does seem to be, if I post a photo on DS of me versus one of the guys, I seem to get more attention, for better or for worse. And it's like, well, if it's
Yeah.
promoting the band, is that a way to use the system that we're in just to get out there and then again sort of normalize stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Is it so? It's I this is a debate that I have within myself, and there absolutely isn't a straightforward answer, which is a little bit annoying.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of
I'm
wish
with
there
you.
was. Um, so I think it's kind of I do it on a sort of case by case basis, I guess, depending who it is. I mean, my main concern as like a PR agent is I never want to put somebody in front of put someone in a scenario where they might be uncomfortable or they might be unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's where, yeah, we do a little bit of vetting with the journalists sometimes and think,
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know what? I'm not going to put you in front of this person just because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, if there's
Yeah.
a female blog that's doing good stuff, then I think, yeah, let's put you there because it helps get you presence and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's not an easy one.
Yeah, exactly. It's tricky. I
Mhm.
just know that, definitely like from some of the work that I've done, and you certainly you'll understand this. Like I had one project that I promoted that I had done, which was like, well, my wife was fronting the band basically. And yeah, I certainly noticed from the marketing that like you get the similar artists and whatever and what these people are into, and basically they're into loads of other bands that are like metal bands, probably with a bunch of dudes and a female singer, and
Yeah.
that's clearly like what they're looking for. And again, as you say, you get these blogs that are dedicated to at least like bands with metal with female members,
Yeah.
and they're almost like post, as you say, I guess that's what's awkward about it. It's kind of like poster girls type thing,
Almost in a way, yeah.
like and mixed with metal.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, as you say, like men do get that too, because rock stars, iconic
Oh,
rock stars, whatever,
absolutely.
are like
Yeah.
poster figures too. So yeah, it's a tricky one
It
to
yeah.
tackle of where the line is, I suppose.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm with you, and I find it to be a fascinating topic and something that I'm interested to seeing how the culture develops
Yeah,
on.
yeah, definitely.
Um, so the fact that you're kind of at the forefront of that is really fascinating. And you've touched upon it a couple of times, so I just kind of want to make sure to get that in there. About your work in PR and the music industry in general. I mean, I first actually came across you through C Squared,
Yeah.
and yeah, funnily enough, I listened to you on many
All
podcasts
right. Uh-huh.
in the past, because especially a little while ago, I listened to that podcast a lot. So yeah, I've got all sorts of cool information and things from you, and
Good.
thank you for that. And so, how did you get into working into those kind of music industry aspects and working in PR and specifically C Squared and things like that?
Yeah, so I started doing a little bit of journalism sort of through my undergrad, actually, because there's a friend on my course who he runs sort of smallish music blog based in Liverpool, and I'm still there. I still do reviews for them every now and again, and so that was kind of my first sort of discovering that actually metal PR existed, because it kind of, I had no idea how it worked, how journalists were receiving the promo packages and things. It's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I quite like this side of things. I enjoy writing. I like that sort of thing. Um, and then I ended up just sort of doing it. I think that's almost the way to get into the music industry in a way, is you just sort of start, and it's a bit of a fumble at first, to be honest, but you kind of learn on the way. And so I set up a really small PR company called Deviate PR that I have like a handful of really good really lovely clients through them. And then I just encountered Curtis on Facebook. I think it was probably like some sort of marketing PR group or something. And then I got invited on what was called the C Squared podcast at the time. And then all of a sudden it was you should come and work with us. It was
Nice.
the most sort of unexpected chance kind of employment, I suppose. So yeah, so I still have my little stuff that I do through myself. But yeah, I'm also working with C Squared, and that's amazing because we get all sorts of wonderful clients through them, and it's really interesting to do. And yeah, I get to listen to amazing bands as part of my work, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, especially for people that might not really be aware, like you once were before
yeah.
you got into this, like, what does your work with? Well, I suppose all of that, but especially C Squared. What does it look like? What does it entail?
Yeah, so it's basically our job to put bands and artists in front of as many journalists and media outlets as possible to help them promote whatever it is they want to promote. So whether it's they've got a new album coming out, a single video, tour announcement, any sort of news, things like that. So it's yeah, we work with bands in advance. You know, we'll get their album and their all their materials, their photos, their artwork about 3 months in advance. And we send it out and we just do our absolute best to convince people to cover them, basically. So it's a bit of a strange job in that respect of it's very difficult to sort of measure. And results are not always guaranteed, but it's great to sort of discover new bands and you know send them to people and be like, really, you should listen to this. It's amazing. So and the journalists are all wonderful that we work with, and I really appreciate everything they do. Because that's the thing, because I do some reviews. I know from that side of it how long it takes to write an album review. So anybody who does it, I'm like, you know, you're donating your time, because most people are unpaid is how it works really with journalism. So yeah, but there's so many amazing people that I've met because of it, and it's much fun.
Yeah, I suppose it's been a fantastic thing for you, like in the PhD and everything that you're doing, all of that research to actually have that insight into the industry where you're in a particular position as well in PR where it's your job to talk to all kinds of different people.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, really cool to do that. And obviously yeah, well, as I say, I've literally even heard you talking to other people on that podcast and stuff, which is of course now heavy business. But so for you there, like when you guys get a client, do you just like kind of chuck it around between you and be like, all right, you deal with this one and you listen to that, and then you kind of work on their package and you contact people, or do people wear different hats within the organization?
It sort of depends a little bit. I'm very much on. I tend to do most of the writing nowadays, so I have slightly fewer campaigns that I manage myself with C Squared, and I do a lot of the writing stuff. Which is great because it means I get to listen to almost every client that we get, because you know you listen to music when writing their press releases and things. And then I tend to manage a handful. It's sometimes it's a little bit of a genre division, sometimes it's a theme. So yeah, because I met Joan Avant, who I'm doing the our sort of secretive project with. I actually met her because she was a C Squared client for her latest album. And so because the themes are all sort of Victorian-y and stuff, they were like, yeah, this is my jam. I'm going to look after her and do all of her stuff. So sometimes it's almost matching the clients to which one of us is kind of best suited in a way.
Yeah, going to get behind it the most, resonates with it.
Yeah,
cool, nice. And so like going forward then, I suppose you're got so many fingers and so many pies again, and perhaps have a long way to go in terms of thinking about that. But do you have an idea of what you would like to do going forward in terms of what would the kind of dream life look like in terms of the division of these things that you do and what you'd like to do in the future?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, I would love to do some work in academia at the end of this, just because I think it's fascinating. And yeah, particularly if I can do sort of the metal side of things, that would be great. So we'll see what happens with that. PR stuff, I enjoy doing it. It's great. So yeah, I kind of think, well, maybe do half and half. Who knows? We'll see. But yeah, I mean, music wise, I would absolutely love to do more and more music, and we do have, several releases planned for Disconnected Souls. So I think for the next few years we're going to be busy with that. Yeah, it's. I mean, I just enjoy working people, and I really do enjoy doing collaborations and things, actually, because it's a sort of interesting challenge of like, oh, okay, this person is approaching it from this viewpoint, which is maybe not what I would do. So how do I make my creativity sort of fit in with them? And it's a really fun challenge, and you kind of produce things that maybe you would never have produced otherwise.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it. The problem is that I enjoy doing everything. So I kind of be like, I just want to do everything. So we'll see what happens.
But it's this kind of, it seems overall like this sort of combination of creativity that's the real driver for you, and also kind of intellect in the just exploring these things like the academia, and I suppose in a way philosophy and culture, and music and creativity, this kind of combination. And so for music as an aspiration, you're more drawn to creating music, I suppose, than the idea of performing live or touring.
I think so. I mean, I do miss performing live, and I would absolutely love us to get doing something. I think the touring life is probably not for me. I like having my own bathroom and my own bed. And
you've spoken to enough musicians and people in the industry.
I see enough on social media, and just like, you know what? I like my whole comforts too much.
I'm with you. Yeah.
I mean, I would try it, but I'm not sure it's a long-term plan for me. Yeah.
And do you have anything else that you're into in general that's aside from all of these things?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I like doing cross stitch, if that's interesting.
Cool.
I guess I'm a little bit of an environmentalist, which probably comes through in my music more than anything. Me just ranting about the environment.
I get it.
It's a way of, doing something. So yeah, that's kind of what my time gets taken up with mostly.
Nice. Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like you fill your time quite productively. So
try to be.
Nice. Yeah, wow. The time has absolutely flown past. I've taken a great deal of your time, so I really, really appreciate that. I suppose we should look to wrap it up, really. I was curious, very quickly, perhaps before we do, just sometimes I like to, you have a lot of experience, and I think sometimes it can be really great to perhaps share some advice with other creators or people in the industry, and perhaps people like yourself. And so from all your experiences, if there was one thing that you'd like to say to people, what would it be?
This might sound a little bit odd almost. I guess almost be patient in a way, because I think the past couple of years with our Disconnected Souls stuff, I was getting to a point of thinking, why haven't we quite got to where we want to get to yet? And the reality is it just takes time. And you see sometimes these bands appear overnight, and the reality is most of them haven't. It's years and years of work. So I guess don't be disheartened, and be patient, and stuff happens when I think it means to happen. If that makes sense. I don't know if that's any help, but hopefully it is. Like, don't lose hope if stuff doesn't happen immediately, because that's not quite how the world works, I think. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic advice. It really, really is. And I appreciate this so much. It's been so wonderful talking to you. Could really happily chat with you all day. So like, is there anything you want to get in there before we finish up?
I guess, if you're interested in slightly odd heavy metal, please do check out Disconnected Souls. And I would love to know what people think of the new album and what we do. But yeah, so thank you very much. Anyway, it's been wonderful talking to you as well. Really enjoyed this. So yeah,
great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Creating a Universe. Special thank you to Holly for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to check out Holly's band Disconnected Souls at disconnectedsoul.com. You can also check out links to Holly's other projects at linktr.ee/HollyF1. Links will be in the show notes. That's all for this one. I'll see you next time.